The sirens wailed across the capital. Their mournful sound echoed off the polished towers. Down below, millions of people scrambled for the starports. The final order had been given: abandon Haven. You stood still amidst the chaos. Your scrapper's jacket felt thin against the cold wind. Everyone else ran for their lives. You just looked up. Above the clouds, the shield was a broken mosaic. It was our moon, or what was left of it. For generations, it had protected Haven, a perfect silver sphere of ancient tech. Now it was a field of dead fragments. They tumbled in a silent, useless orbit. The authorities said it was irreparable. They said the void swarm was coming. Evacuation was the only answer. You knew they were wrong. You saw more than shattered rock and dead metal. You saw a pattern in the chaos, a design waiting for a hand to guide it. The others saw a tombstone in the sky. You saw a puzzle box, and you had a feeling you knew where to find the key. The air vibrated with the roar of evac ships. Their engines burned hot against the darkening sky. You felt a different vibration, a low hum. It came from the broken moon itself. Your methods had always been strange. The other scrappers pulled apart old tech. They melted it down for raw materials. You listened to it. You would press your ear to a dormant engine. You would trace the silent circuits with your fingers. They said you were crazy, that you were talking to ghosts. They called you the Whisperer, and not kindly. It wasn't a great nickname for making friends. The authority cast you out from the guild years ago. Your obsession with dead tech was unproductive. It was inefficient. Your workshop was a museum of forgotten machines. Each one whispered a piece of its story to you. And now, the greatest machine of all was singing. It was a quiet song, a sad song of slumber. No one else could hear it. To them, the sky was silent, but for the sirens. You had tried to tell them. You showed them your charts. You explained the resonant frequencies. They saw only the ramblings of an outcast, a scrapper with a secret she couldn't prove. The High Executor himself had dismissed you. The moon is dead, he had declared. Our future is in the stars, not in its shadow. His words sealed your world's fate and your resolve. The last evacuation transport was scheduled for dawn. Security at the starports was absolute. But security at the salvage yards was a joke. Everyone was too busy saving themselves. They were not guarding the junk heaps. That's where you found the Stardust Drifter. She was a single-person salvage skiff. Her hull was patched 100 times over. Her engines were stripped for parts. To everyone else, she was garbage. To you, she was a chariot. You spent your last hours in a flurry of motion. You bypassed the ignition locks. You patched the fuel lines with scavenged conduits. You rerouted power from the life support systems. You wouldn't need much air for a short trip. Breathing was optional for success, right? You worked with a familiar rhythm, a dance of circuits and wires. The ship's console flickered to life. A single green light blinked in the dusty cockpit. It was a beacon of defiance. While your world fled, you prepared to fly toward the danger. You would not abandon your home. You would not abandon that quiet song. Your destination was the dead heart of the sky. The shattered moon was calling your name. The Stardust Drifter groaned in protest. It rattled as it broke through the upper atmosphere. Warning lights flashed on your console. You ignored them. They were more like suggestions anyway. Below you, the lights of your city vanished. They were replaced by the cold, black canvas of space. And then you saw it up close. The dead moon filled your view screen. The fragments were immense. Some were the size of mountains. Others were small, sharp islands of metal. They floated in a silent, gravitational dance. You piloted the tiny ship through the debris field. It was like navigating a graveyard for giants. You aimed for the largest piece, the core. It was a jagged sphere, its surface scarred by the ancient cataclysm. Your ship's landing struts screeched against the surface. The impact sent a shudder through the deck. You had landed on a ghost. The ground beneath you was not simple rock. It was a polished, dark material. It was covered in geometric lines and patterns. You stood on the cold skin of a machine whose warranty had definitely expired. You took a breath of recycled air. The first step was complete. You stepped out onto the moon's surface. Your boots made no sound. There was no air here to carry it. The silence was absolute, or so it should have been. But the song was stronger here. It was a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the soles of your feet. It resonated deep inside your chest. It was a voice, and it was lonely. You found what you were looking for. It was a maintenance port, half hidden by debris. The access panel was sealed tight. It hadn't been opened in millennia. Your plasma cutter made short work of the ancient lock. Inside was a web of crystalline conduits. They were dark and cold. You pulled a universal interface cable from your pack. You had built it yourself, of course. It was a mess of wires and salvaged chips. You plugged your custom device into the port. Your datapad screen flickered, then flooded with symbols. They were not letters or numbers. They were elegant, flowing glyphs. It was a language you had never seen. Yet, somehow, you could feel its meaning. The machine showed you its star-born language. It was a story of creation and of a long, long wait. The glyphs painted a picture of the moon's purpose. It was not just a shield. It was a network. Billions of energy conduits ran through it. They connected every fragment into a single fortress. But one connection was severed. The schematic on your screen showed a massive canyon. It was a physical break in the moon's core fragment, a chasm of silence. This chasm separated the primary power source from the shield emitters. The ancient builders had a bridge for this, a solid light conduit for maintenance drones. That bridge was gone now. The gap was almost a kilometer wide. The other side was shrouded in darkness. Your little ship couldn't fly in this complex gravity. You had to cross it yourself. You stood at the edge of the Great Canyon. The silence here felt deeper, heavier. The song of the moon was weaker. It was cut off by this wound. You secured a magnetic grapple line to your belt. You took a deep breath. This was the most dangerous walk of your life. A perilous walk between worlds, or at least two very large pieces of one. Hopefully with no surprise toll booths. Your mag boots clamped onto the sheer cliff face. You began your slow descent into the chasm. The only light came from your helmet lamp. It cut a tiny circle in the immense darkness. Below you was a void. It was a straight drop into the moon's mechanical heart. One wrong move would be your last. But you were a scrapper. You were used to precarious places and questionable life choices. You reached the bottom of the canyon. The break was clean, a massive fracture in the machine's crust. On the other side, you could see the corresponding rupture. The energy conduits were frayed and dead. You pulled out the conductor cable from your pack. It was your masterpiece, a thick, braided cord of every conductive metal you could find. It was heavy and clumsy. It was also your only hope. You fired your grapple line across the chasm. It clanged against the far wall and held firm. You attached your makeshift cable. Then, you began the slow process of pulling it across. Hours passed in the silent dark. Finally, You made the connection. You jammed the ends of your cable into the severed conduits. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. A single glyph on the wall beside you began to glow. It was a soft, blue light. A first glimmer of hope in the endless dark. The blue light pulsed with a steady rhythm. It was a heartbeat. Your datapad chimed. The moon was reporting a power surge, a tiny, insignificant surge. But it was a start. The song in your head grew a little stronger. It was a murmur of gratitude. You felt a smile touch your lips. Maybe you weren't so crazy after all. Then a new alert appeared on your screen. It was an authority broadcast, unencrypted and urgent. You patched it through to your helmet's audio. The high executor's voice was strained with panic. A long-range scout had just returned. It brought terrible news. The Void Swarm was here, years ahead of schedule. The enemy the moon once blocked had returned. Their fleet was massive. Hundreds of biomechanical ships blotted out the stars. They were on a direct course for Haven. The evacuation was not complete. Millions were still on the planet. The evacuation clock was no longer a deadline. It was now a death sentence. And you were stuck on a dead rock, holding a homemade cable. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. The news of the swarm changed everything. The Authority needed a scapegoat for their failed predictions. They found one in you, the lone saboteur, the outcast who fled to the moon. They claimed you were disrupting the evacuation, that your unsanctioned flight had drawn the enemy's attention. It was a lie, but it was a simple one. People believed it. A new directive flashed across your datapad. You were now a fugitive. 2 Authority patrol ships were dispatched from the fleet. Their mission, to apprehend you, to stop your work at any cost. Apparently, unsanctioned moon repair was high on their list of felonies. You watched their engine flares burn across the blackness. They were coming for you. You were being hunted by your own people. You had to hide. Disconnecting your cable was not an option. You gathered your tools and scrambled away from the chasm. You needed to disappear into the moon's machine canyons. You switched off all your external lights. You ran your systems on minimum power. The Stardust Drifter was a cold, dark speck on a cold, dark surface. You hoped it would be enough. The patrol ships grew from tiny stars into menacing shapes. You navigated the maze of canyons and ravines. The patrol ships swept their searchlights across the surface. Their beams cut sharp lines of white in the darkness. You pressed yourself into the shadows of a massive conduit. You held your breath as a light passed just meters above you. The Authority was not playing games. They would shoot on sight. When the ships moved on, you continued your journey. The glowing glyph in the chasm was a beacon. It had reactivated a maintenance pathway on your datapad. A path that led deep into the moon's core. It led to the control nexus. You followed the glowing lines on your map. Through silent service tunnels, across bridges of inert light, deeper and deeper into the machine. You finally reached a vast, spherical chamber. At its center floated a crystalline spire. This was the core. This was the moon's brain. But the schematic on your screen showed something strange. There was no catastrophic damage here. No sign of a fatal blow from ages past. You found not damage, but a deliberate shutdown. The moon had not died. It had been put to sleep. A single console stood before the floating spire. It was the only interface in the entire chamber. As you approached, it shimmered to life. New glyphs appeared on its surface. They were different from the others. These were not technical readouts or system diagnostics. They were questions, not about physics or engineering, but about art, hope, and sacrifice. The ancient builders were masters of logic. Their creation was a masterpiece of star science. But they had faced a foe that logic could not defeat, a foe that fed on despair. They realized their perfect machine needed something more, something they could not program into it. It needed a mind that could dream beyond logic, a mind that would defy impossible odds for no logical reason. The moon was not broken. It was waiting. It needed a key its creators lacked. It needed a partner. It was waiting for a species capable of irrational hope. And you were currently the leading candidate. It was waiting for someone like you. The final glyph pulsed on the console. It was a request. It asked you to connect not with your tools, but with your mind. The machine needed a human spark. You placed your hand on the console. The surface felt cool, then warm. The song of the moon flooded your mind. It was no longer a faint hum. It was a symphony. You saw its history. You felt its long, lonely vigil. You understood its purpose. And you understood the final, terrible price of its activation. It needed a conscious mind to pilot it, to be its heart. You became the final conductor. Your thoughts became its commands. Your will became its power. The connection was total. You were the moon, and the moon was you. Through its ancient sensors, you saw space. You saw the swarm fleet arriving in orbit above Haven. Their ships were grotesque things of chitin and metal. They began to power their primary weapons. You looked down at your own world. You saw the last, desperate ships trying to flee. You saw the lights of cities filled with people who had no escape. The people who had called you crazy. The people who were hunting you. And you felt no anger. Only a fierce, burning need to protect them. The time had come. You began the sequence to awaken the giant. A tremor ran through the entire moon. The power from your patched conduit surged. It flowed into the heart of the nexus. The crystalline spire before you blazed with intense blue light. On the surface, the glowing glyphs spread like wildfire. Conduits that had been dark for 1,000,000 years ignited. The energy network came alive. Outside, in the silent graveyard of space, the impossible happened. The fragments of the moon began to move. Small pieces shifted first. They aligned themselves with their neighbors. Then the larger sections, the mountain-sized chunks of machine, began their majestic dance. They were drawn together by invisible, powerful forces. They were not crashing. They were assembling. Beams of hard light shot between the fragments. They were like cosmic threads, stitching the world back together. The gaps closed. The ancient seams met. The broken sphere reformed around you. It was a symphony of creation played out in silence. The puzzle box you had seen from your world was solving itself. The shattered shield was becoming whole again. The swarm fleet paid no attention to the strange moon. Their focus was on the helpless planet below. The lead ship, a monstrous leviathan, opened its weapon ports. A sickly green energy gathered at its prow. This was the planet killer, the weapon that had shattered the moon eons ago. The enemy fired its devastating first shot. A beam of pure annihilation crossed the void. It was aimed at the heart of your world, but it would never arrive. Just as the beam struck, the final piece of the moon slotted into place. The sphere was complete. Every conduit glowed. Every system was online. Your mind, your will, commanded it to live. The restored shield flared to brilliant, impossible life. The green beam struck the reformed moon. It did not explode. It did not even scorch the surface. The energy was caught, absorbed, and redirected. It flowed across the shield in a beautiful, harmless aurora of light. The unbroken fortress held. The moon, your moon, was alive, and it was angry. A moment of stunned silence seemed to pass. The swarm had not expected this. Their ultimate weapon had failed. On Haven, the people looked up. The sky was no longer filled with a broken ring. A perfect silver moon now stood guard. It shone with a light no one had seen in their lifetime, a light of defiance and hope. Then, from the moon, your moon, came the answer. A beam of pure, white energy erupted from its surface. It was not a weapon of destruction. It was a wave of focused resonance. It struck the swarm fleet. It did not tear their ships apart. It simply resonated with their organic components and turned them off. The biomechanical vessels went dark and inert. Their lights died. Their engines fell silent. The invaders turned and fled into the dark. The remaining ships, now powerless, tumbled away. The threat was over. You stood within the moon's core. The symphony in your mind quieted to a peaceful hum. You were connected to this ancient guardian. You were its heart. Through its eyes, you watched the sun rise on your saved home. You were no longer the outcast. You were the woman who repaired a dead moon.